Hey there, curious minds! Welcome to this intellectual journey. Have you ever felt that strange, powerful connection with thousands of people at a movie theater or a concert? Like, for a moment, everyone feels exactly the same thing. Well, that feeling isn't an accident. It was designed, perfected, and transformed into a social weapon over 2.5 millennia ago. Today, we're not talking about battles or sword-wielding heroes. We're going to uncover the true secret code that built Western civilization. And the key lies in a place you thought you knew, the theater, but not as you imagine it. Forget the applause and comfy seats. Think of it as a tool for social engineering on an unprecedented scale. Before we dive in, I wanted to mention something about the visuals you're seeing. To bring this narrative to life, I've used AI tools to generate the images. So think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and atmosphere of what I'm telling you. They won't always be an exact or literal representation, but rather a visual accompaniment to let your imagination soar with me. I truly hope you enjoy it. Let's travel back to 5th century BC Athens. Imagine the city. It wasn't just the Parthenon and white-bearded philosophers. It was a noisy place, brimming with political tension under the constant threat of war and disease. Anxiety, fear, and uncertainty were a fact of life for the average citizen, a veritable social pressure cooker. Athenian leaders faced a problem. How do you keep such a volatile society united and functional? How do you manage the collective stress of thousands of people without everything exploding? You could use force, of course. But the Greeks found a much more elegant and powerful solution, one that controlled not the body, but the soul. They built immense amphitheaters like the Theater of Dionysus, capable of holding over 15,000 people. But these weren't just simple entertainment venues. They were laboratories of emotion, public clinics for the city's soul. And their medicine was performance fiction, stories told live and in person. Their first tool was tragedy. Think of plays like Oedipus Rex, the story of a man who unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother. A horrific fate filled with suffering and despair. The audience attending wouldn't be surprised. Most already knew the myth perfectly. So, if they already knew the ending, what was the point? The goal wasn't the what, but the how. The objective was to experience extreme emotions in a safe, controlled environment. To witness the worst possible scenario, absolute chaos, played out before you. To feel the fear, the pity, the anguish of the protagonist as if they were your own. The great philosopher Aristotle, who studied this phenomenon in depth, gave this process a name. He called it catharsis, a word we can translate as purification or purgation. The idea is that by experiencing these intense emotions through the characters, the spectator would release their own repressed anxieties and fears. It was like an emotional cleansing. You'd leave the theater feeling lighter, purified. Your personal problems, compared to the tragedy of Oedipus, seemed much smaller and more manageable. Theater functioned as a pressure release valve for the pent-up tension in Athenian society, a stroke of psychological genius. But it wasn't all tears and suffering. The Greeks had a second equally powerful tool, comedy. Playwrights like Aristophanes wrote plays that today we'd consider incredibly audacious. They mercilessly mocked the most important politicians, philosophers, generals, and even the gods themselves. This wasn't just to get laughs. Comedy was a space for radical freedom of expression. It was a way to criticize power without sparking a civil war. It allowed the common citizen to laugh at those who governed, humanizing them and reminding leaders that their power wasn't absolute. It was, in essence, social control through satire. Imagine, for a moment, the most powerful politician in Athens sitting in the front row, forced to listen as an actor on stage imitated him and mocked his decisions in front of thousands of citizens roaring with laughter. It was a lesson in humility and a reminder of the people's power, a way to maintain balance. So, we have tragedy to purge fear and pity, and comedy to release frustration and criticism, two sides of the same coin. Two mechanisms designed to maintain the mental health and stability of an entire city. Theater was a public necessity, state-funded, just like hospitals or security are today. Now, for the key question from the title, was this an exclusively Greek invention? The answer is complex. Many ancient cultures had rituals, dances, and ceremonies that included theatrical elements. Think of the religious rituals of ancient Egypt or tribal dances that told stories of hunting and gods. The difference, and here lies the Greek genius, is that they were the first to systematize it, to separate performance from religion. They transformed it into a form of civic art and, crucially, a tool for analyzing the human condition. They didn't just do it, they questioned why they did it. They theorized it. They created a structure, the plot, the characters, the chorus that commented on the action. They transformed ritual into drama. And in doing so, they gave us the language we still use today to tell stories, from Hollywood blockbusters to the series you watch at home. All Western narrative draws from this wellspring. But the real twist, the deepest secret of Athenian theater, isn't individual catharsis, but collective catharsis. Think about it. 15,000 people, rich and poor, men and women, citizens and foreigners, all sitting together, breathing the same air, and feeling the exact same emotions at the exact same time. In that moment, social differences blurred. The Athenians ceased to be an isolated individual with their problems and became part of a whole, of the polis, the city-state. They felt part of a community, united by a shared emotional experience. It was the creation of a collective consciousness in real time. This is Athens' secret weapon. It wasn't their ships or their soldiers. It was their ability to forge social and emotional unity through theater. A society that feels united, purges its fears together, and laughs at its leaders together is an incredibly strong, resilient, and difficult to conquer society. Theater was the glue that held Athenian democracy together. It was civic training. It taught people to feel empathy, to think critically about power, and most importantly, to feel part of something bigger than themselves. It wasn't a pastime. It was a fundamental pillar of the state. This phenomenon hasn't disappeared. It has mutated. Today, we don't seek collective catharsis in stone amphitheaters, but in movie theaters, soccer stadiums, and massive music festivals, places where we gather to share an intense emotion with thousands of strangers. When you cry at the end of a movie surrounded by people also crying, or when you sing a song at the top of your lungs alongside 50,000 people, you're participating in the same ritual as the ancient Athenians. You're connecting with one of the most basic human needs, the need to feel together. So the next time you go to the movies or a concert, remember this. You're not just consuming entertainment. You're participating in an ancient and powerful rite of social cohesion. The technology of the soul invented millennia ago to remind us that despite our differences, deep down, we all feel the same. Tragedy, comedy, and catharsis weren't just literary genres. They were a civilization's answer to the most important question of all: how do we live together? And their solution was so brilliant that its echo resonates to this day. In every story that moves us, unites us, and makes us feel for an instant a little less alone. Theater, therefore, isn't just a building or an art form, it's a technology of empathy. A mechanism for synchronizing the hearts of thousands of people. The Greeks' greatest innovation wasn't logic or philosophy, but the discovery that a well-told story could change the world, starting with the inner world of each citizen. Let's reflect for a moment on the magnitude of this idea. Instead of repressing the population's negative emotions, the Athenian state deliberately provoked them in a controlled space. They recognized that fear and sadness weren't enemies to be avoided, but energies that, if channeled correctly, could strengthen the community. This teaches us something fundamental about human nature. We cannot escape dark emotions. Anxiety, loss, anger are part of our existence. The Greeks didn't try to create a utopia without suffering. Instead, they created a space to collectively confront that suffering and emerge stronger. And comedy, for its part, was the acknowledgement that no society is perfect and no leader is infallible. Laughter was an act of resistance and at the same time integration. When you laugh at a problem, you strip it of its power. When you laugh with your neighbor at the same political joke, you strengthen your bond with them. Shared laughter is a profoundly social act. Let's consider the legacy. When the Roman Empire conquered Greece, it didn't destroy its theaters. On the contrary, they copied them throughout the empire. They understood, perhaps in a more pragmatic and less philosophical way, the immense power of keeping the populace entertained and emotionally regulated. The famous bread and circuses has its roots here. However, the Romans often lost the psychological subtlety. They preferred gladiatorial spectacles, more visceral and direct, to the complexity of Greek tragedy. They exchanged catharsis, that emotional purge, for simple adrenaline, a simplification that tells us a lot about the difference between the two cultures. For centuries, the essence of Greek theater was lost, transformed. But the central idea, that of story as a mirror to the human soul and a social adhesive, never disappeared. It re-emerged in the works of Shakespeare, who, like the Greeks, explored the depths of ambition, jealousy, and madness for a mass audience. Shakespeare perfectly understood the formula. His theaters, like the Globe Theatre in London, brought together people from all social classes. And all of them, from the noble in the box seat to the standing artisan, felt the same terror at the madness of King Lear, or the same anguish for the fate of Romeo and Juliet. Again, collective catharsis. And today, technology has taken this idea to a scale the Greeks could never have dreamed of. A single movie can be watched by hundreds of millions of people worldwide, generating a global conversation and a shared emotional experience on a planetary level. We are the first civilization capable of experiencing global catharsis. When a character in a popular series dies and social media is flooded with lamentations, we're seeing the Greek chorus in action. Millions of people commenting, processing, and sharing the grief of a fictional story. It's the theater of Dionysus, only now it's digital and spans the entire planet. Returning to the initial question, was it a Greek invention or a global phenomenon? The answer might be that the impulse to tell stories and share emotions is universal, it's human. But it was the Greeks who transformed it into a conscious technology, an art, and a science of society's emotional management. They gave us the instruction manual. They showed us that a community could be built not just with laws and armies, but with poems and performances. They taught us that empathy, the ability to feel what another feels, is the most powerful social force there is. And that lesson is perhaps more relevant today than ever. Thus, the theater born in Athens isn't just an anecdote in art history. It's the origin of one of our most sophisticated tools for social survival, one that has allowed us to process our fears, criticize our follies, and above all, remind us that we are part of a common story. The next time you turn off the screen after a series that has completely captivated you, take a second. Feel that emotional echo? It's the ghost of Greek catharsis, a 2,500-year-old echo whispering that the story you just watched has, in some way, changed you and connected you with others. It's fascinating how a solution created for a specific city-state with its unique problems became a universal template. This suggests that the emotional and social challenges Athens faced are, in essence, the same ones we face: the fear of the unknown, the need for justice, the tension between the individual and the community. The structure of Greek tragedy, with its hero committing a fatal error out of pride or ignorance, still speaks directly to us. We see that same hamartia, or tragic flaw, in today's fallen leaders, in self-destructive celebrities, and even in our own mistakes. Theater gave us a vocabulary to understand failure. And the chorus, that group of actors who commented on the action, isn't it the precursor to our news commentators, sports analysts, or even the comment section of a video like this one? The chorus was the voice of the community, the one that processed and made sense of the unfolding events. Its function lives on. Even the architecture of their theaters was a marvel of acoustic engineering designed for the community. Designed so that a single actor's voice could reach the last row without amplification, ensuring that no one, not even the poorest sitting highest up, missed a single word. It was an intrinsically democratic design. The fact that plays were performed during religious festivals dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and chaos, also wasn't a coincidence. Theater was a space where the irrational and chaotic could be explored safely, to understand them and, ultimately, integrate them into the city's order. Catharsis, then, is more than simple relief. It's an act of learning. By witnessing the downfall of a great man like Oedipus, the Athenian citizen not only felt better about their own problems, but also reflected on the limits of human knowledge, the power of fate, and the fragility of fortune. The Athenian genius was creating a system that educated its citizens emotionally and civically without them feeling indoctrinated. It wasn't a boring class, it was an immersive spectacle. It's the most effective form of teaching, one that masquerades as entertainment, a principle that today's great communicators know very well. Therefore, when we talk about the birth of theater, we're not talking about the origin of entertainment. We're talking about the origin of mass communication as a tool to shape collective consciousness, an idea so potent that it remains the pillar of multi-billion-dollar industries today. Greek theater reminds us that stories aren't a luxury, they're a necessity. They are the software with which we run the operating system of our society. And understanding how those stories work, how they affect us, and how they unite us, is understanding one of the most powerful forces shaping our world. In summary, Athens didn't invent storytelling, but it did invent the why and how of public narration. They created a civic event, a social ritual, and collective therapy, all in one. They transformed the act of listening to a story into the act of building a community. And that, without a doubt, is one of antiquity's greatest legacies. Let's consider the contrast with our digital age. We often consume content in solitude through our phones or laptops. The Greek model insists on the importance of shared physical space. The presence of other bodies, the sound of other laughs and other sobs amplified the experience and made it real, communal. This physical dimension is crucial. Feeling the vibration of 1,000 voices in unison, glancing at a stranger moved by the same thing as you, creates a type of connection that no virtual experience can fully replicate. The Greeks understood the biology of community. They knew we are corporeal beings, not just minds. The choice of themes for tragedies was also deliberate. They were usually based on myths and legends that all Athenians knew from childhood. This created a common cultural foundation. By reinterpreting these myths on stage, theater kept alive the conversation about who they were as a people, where they came from, and what their values were. These weren't stories about common people. They were about kings, queens, and heroes. Why? Because the downfall of a powerful figure is much more impactful. If it could happen to Oedipus, the intelligent and powerful king, it could happen to anyone. This generated a universal feeling of humility and a profound reflection on the human condition that everyone shared. Even the financing of theater was a civic act. The wealthiest citizens had the duty to sponsor the plays in a system called choregia. It wasn't seen as an expense, but as an honor and one of the greatest contributions they could make to the city's well-being. Art was a shared responsibility. Comedy, with its fierce criticism, also played a role in democracy. Consider Aristophanes' play The Wasps, which mocked the Athenian judicial system. By laughing at its flaws, the play opened a public debate on how to improve it. Laughter wasn't the end, it was the means to social reform. This idea of a safe space for criticism is fundamental. The stage was a place where truths could be spoken that, in any other context, would have been punished as treason. Theater was the safety valve that allowed discontent to be aired and debated rather than festering in secret and erupting in violence. Furthermore, theater festivals were competitions. Different playwrights presented their works, and a jury of citizens voted for the best. This fostered innovation and excellence. It wasn't enough to just tell a story. It had to be told in the most impactful, poetic, and relevant way possible. Art flourished under the pressure of competition. So, the next time you watch a film award ceremony like the Oscars, remember that the idea of rewarding narrative excellence in a public, competitive event isn't new. It's a tradition that traces directly back to the Dionysian festivals of ancient Athens. We're still playing the same game. The universality of Greek themes is astonishing. Antigone, the woman who defies the state to follow her conscience and bury her brother, raises a debate about law and morality that remains central to our society. Should we always obey authority, or are there higher duties? Theater forces us to ask ourselves these questions. Prometheus, the titan who steals fire from the gods to give it to humanity, is the embodiment of scientific progress and rebellion against limitations. His punishment, being chained to a rock for eternity, warns us about the dangers of unchecked ambition. Isn't this the same discussion we're having today about artificial intelligence or genetic engineering? The Greeks didn't give us easy answers. They gave us complex questions. Theater wasn't a life instruction manual, it was a gymnasium for the mind and heart. A place to exercise empathy, critical judgment, and the ability to see a problem from multiple perspectives. That's why its influence goes beyond art. The idea of presenting an argument, considering the opposing viewpoint, and reaching a synthesis, which is the basis of drama, is also the foundation of philosophical thought and democratic debate. Theater and democracy in Athens grew together, feeding off each other. Catharsis wasn't just a passive phenomenon of receiving emotions, it was also a catalyst for action. After watching a play that exposed a social injustice, the citizen didn't leave the theater merely relieved. They left thinking, debating, and potentially more motivated to participate in civic life and improve their city. Perhaps the greatest secret isn't that theater was a weapon, but that it was a double-edged sword. It could be used to unite and strengthen the community, but also to manipulate it. A powerful story can inspire virtue, but it can also incite hatred. The Greeks knew this, and Plato, in fact, distrusted poets precisely because of this power. This ambivalent legacy is what we have inherited. From political propaganda that uses narrative techniques to demonize an enemy, to social movements that use personal stories to generate empathy and change. The power of collective narration, unleashed in Athens, remains one of the most contended forces in the world. Ultimately, the answer to whether it was a local invention or a global phenomenon is that it was both. It was born from a universal human impulse, but it was in Athens where that impulse was refined, analyzed, and transformed into a deliberate and self-aware social technology, whose user manual we are still trying to decipher. Athenian theater is, in essence, the discovery that our reality is built upon stories, and that whoever tells the most compelling stories has the power to shape reality. A power that the Athenians decided to wield not in a closed palace, but outdoors, under the sun, in front of all their people. The experience of the play didn't end with the applause. The stories and debates continued in the agora, in homes, in schools. Theater was the city's great conversation starter. It was their hit series that everyone talked about, analyzed, and drew lessons from. It was the cultural heartbeat pumping ideas throughout the entire social body. Tragedy taught us to face fear, comedy taught us to challenge power, and the collective experience taught us that we are not alone in our emotions. Lessons not carved in stone, but etched into the soul of every story that has, since then, dared to move us. The next time a story makes you cry, laugh, or think, remember its lineage. You are the heir to a 2,500-year-old tradition, designed by one of history's most brilliant civilizations to make you wiser, more empathetic, and ultimately, more human. Indeed, Athenian theater was much more than a simple event. It was a training ground for citizenship. By presenting complex moral dilemmas, it forced the audience to judge, to weigh arguments, to put themselves in another's shoes. It was a preparation for the real debates that would take place in the democratic assembly. Consider Aeschylus's play, The Eumenides. It ends with the creation of the world's first jury to resolve a bloody revenge conflict. The play not only told a story, it was legitimizing and explaining the Athenian judicial system itself to its citizens. It was civic pedagogy in the most spectacular way possible. Theater provided a common language and shared imagination. Phrases, characters, and situations from the plays became part of everyday speech, allowing Athenians to discuss complex ideas using these shared references. It was like a web of cultural memes that strengthened their identity. Even participation in the chorus was a form of education. Young citizens who formed the chorus spent months rehearsing, learning to move and speak as a unit. It was a practical lesson on the importance of cooperation and subordinating individual ego to the good of the group. The impact of this invention is so profound that we often don't see it, like a fish doesn't see the water. The three-act structure, the concept of a protagonist with a goal, the character arc, the climax, and the resolution. All this narrative DNA was first isolated and replicated on those hills of Athens. Ultimately, Greek theater is a monument to the idea that the highest form of public life isn't just politics or war, but collective self-reflection. The ability of a society to look at itself in a mirror with its flaws and greatness and learn from that image. It wasn't an escape from reality. It was a deeper immersion into it, a way to process the chaotic present through eternal myths. And in doing so, the Athenians not only entertained themselves, but built themselves as citizens and as a community day by day, play by play. That is the true catharsis. Not just the release of emotions, but the clarity that comes afterward. The understanding, leaving the theater not only feeling lighter, but also a little wiser, a little more connected with your neighbors, a little more prepared to face the complexity of the world. The invention of theater in Athens wasn't a simple chapter in the history of literature. It was the moment humanity discovered that our greatest tool for surviving and thriving together wasn't made of bronze or iron, but of words, emotions, and the magic that happens when we share them in the dark. And that is a truth so potent, it continues to define our world. Because even if buildings crumble and empires fall, well-told stories have a strange habit of becoming immortal. At its core, theater is a celebration of vulnerability. In a world that often demands we be strong and impassive, theater gives us permission to feel. Permission to cry for a stranger on stage, to laugh at our own weaknesses, to fear for a fate that isn't our own. This shared vulnerability is what creates true human connection. It's a reminder that beneath our different social masks, we all harbor the same fears, hopes, and longings. Theater emotionally strips us bare and shows us that in that nakedness we are equal. Comedy, in particular, was a great equalizer. A powerful politician might have armies at his command, but he couldn't control the laughter of 15,000 people. In the theater, the wit of a poet was more powerful than a general's sword. It was the victory of intelligence over brute force. Let's think about the long-term impact. The culture of argumentation, of debating ideas through characters and plots, laid the groundwork for the later development of philosophy and science. Before one could debate the nature of the cosmos, one had to learn to debate the nature of justice in a play. Thus, theater isn't just the ancestor of our cinema and television. It's also an ancestor of our way of thinking, arguing, empathizing. It's one of the pillars upon which not only Western culture was built, but the very idea of an open society that examines itself. Ultimately, theater was born in Athens not as a luxury, but as a response to a fundamental need. The need to make sense of chaos, to build community from individuals, and to navigate life's complexities through the safe simulation that stories offer us. It was a Greek invention, yes? But it was an invention to solve a problem that isn't just Greek, but profoundly human. And that's why thousands of years later, its creation remains so vital, so necessary, and so incredibly powerful. In conclusion, Greek theater was a sophisticated piece of social technology, a mechanism for collective catharsis that strengthened the cohesion of the polis, educated its citizens in empathy and criticism, and laid the foundations of all Western narrative, a secret weapon far more enduring than any army. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey into the heart of Athens and the soul of our stories. It has been an honor to explore these ideas with you. If you're fascinated by how the past shapes our present, subscribe so you don't miss future journeys. And now tell me in the comments, what movie, series, or play has provoked true catharsis in you? I want to read your stories. Until next time, curious minds,